Good afternoon to all of you who are joining us. We've just opened the doors, so let's be patient while people come in. If you would like, it'd be great to know who's in the room. So if you want to use the chat, please feel free to say where you're from, and that would be great. We have people who join from all over the country, so it'll be interesting to see the audience we have today. We're looking at about 60. We'll give it a couple of minutes or two. We know that we sometimes don't get that number, but of course we always do record it. And you can say to friends of yours, if you think today was a session worth listening to, and I think it will be, as they always are, that they can go to leadersmeets.com where they can actually listen or view again. A lot of people take the opportunity to actually download and listen in the car as they're on their way or on a train or whatever. So if you want to post into the chat, please do. We've already started. Hi, Sherry. Hi, Kevin. And hello, Hannah. Welcome. Thanks for joining us and great to know where you're from. We've got certainly someone from Wolverhampton here, so that's a long way from me. I'm down in Taunton in sunny Somerset at this moment in time. What I'm going to do, a number of you will know a little bit about how we've been running these sessions of recent. We are using Slido today again. We have a very short little poll at the beginning. You can download Slido by either one of two methods. You can go to slido.com and enter today's code, which is #LM and then today's date, 10/09/21. Or you can use the QR code and that will take you directly there. For those of you who want to get on with the poll while we wait, please do. I'm going to just give it another minute or two. Nice to see Dan come in. I don't know where Dan is today. Dan either lives in the north or he lives in the south, but wherever you are today, Dan, thanks very much for coming in. And thanks, good afternoon to Eddie Weir. Up in the north today, so it's a sunny day for you up there. I think what we'll do is the numbers will start to build, but I'll just remind people, we are using Slido today for 3 reasons. The first is a poll. So please do go and do complete the poll. That'll be useful. We are also using it for any questions that you have. Now, you'll find in there that you can ask a question, you can own it, or you can make it an anonymous question. Obviously, if it's owned, that would be great. And more importantly, if you think there's a question there that you think is a good one, similar to the one you've got, you can vote for it, which means that question will go further up the list of questions, maybe the top one and answered first. Lastly, we are going to be using it for a feedback poll. That will come up towards the end of the session. And we would ask you if you could just take the time, please, to give us feedback on today. We will leave it open on Slido, so don't feel you have to complete it at 1 o'clock on the dot. We'll leave it open till 1:15. And feedback is important. It is the way we learn and we make some changes. So I think without much ado, let's move on to the poll. So Abraham, if we can please put the poll questions up. There's 2 of them. And I think for terms of our understanding, or more importantly, Elspeth's understanding, the first question is, how many SMEs are in infrastructure and construction? Now, you may be one of them, or you may be part of a large firm, and you want to know how many people are in the SME. So you've got a number of choices: 50,000 companies, 100,000, 150, 200,000, or 250,000. 7 people have answered the question already. So let's move on to the second one. And what percentage of total industry revenue is delivered by SMEs? Once you've got your answer, please just push the send. Now, we're not going to go through the results now. So for those who are late joiners, please feel free to actually complete the 2 poll questions over the next few minutes. what I'm going to now do is suggest that we move on and we bring in our guest for today, Elspeth. Now, Elspeth has a MBE in Engineering and Enterprise. Importantly for today, she was the member of the Innovation Expert Group, and she has 20 years experience of delivering projects in the sector that include the Oxford Circle's Diagonal Crossing project. She's been involved in the Global Future Cities report, which includes work around Boston, New York, Sydney. And she was a founder of IAND, which she's founded to support collaboration in the sector. So Elspeth, I'm going to ask if you could now come in. Anything more you'd like to tell the audience, please do. And it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Howard. I'm just going to share my screen. So if you hold on a quick second. You should see my screen. Can you just confirm that, Howard? Is that okay?
Perfect. I can see it clearly. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. So what I want to talk about today is really how we can leverage procurement to fast track innovation. So sort of thinking about when we're looking at the innovation sector, and when we think about SMEs and emerging companies, the one thing is true, which is that money is the lifeblood for every organization, regardless about whether or not it comes from investment or whether or not it comes from projects that are being delivered. So what I really want to talk about today is actually what's changing in terms of things like procurement regulations, which actually give that real catalyst for change. So what I want to talk about is kind of three things, and why procurement for me is the critical lever for us to be able to deliver innovation at scale to really continue to support the transformation of the infrastructure and construction sector. So I'm going to talk about what some of the new regulations and policies are, talk about why there's a really unique opportunity now for the construction infrastructure sector to really sort of unlock impact at scale, tackling things like the net zero challenge, looking at how we can support levelling up, as well as making sure that we can deliver improved productivity on projects every day. As part of this, I'll highlight a few of the projects that are being delivered through things like transforming construction, as well as some of the work that we're doing ourselves with people like through sort of things like Innovate UK funding to actually support providing more visibility and the ability to collaborate with SMEs at scale when delivering projects. We'll then be opening up into a kind of Q&A piece. So as Howard said, I've worked in the sector for about 20 years, delivered hundreds of projects in different places. I've done a lot of work in London, worked in Boston, worked in the US, as well as working in places like Australia. In terms of the challenges that I've seen there, one of the key things is how do we collaborate and collaborate at scale? Because there's incredible companies, big and small across the sector. And actually we can leverage that in unique skill sets. We can really deliver change. But I'm going to start with actually what is changing. There's a whole bunch of new regulations. There are a whole bunch of new policies. And it's really important that we understand what they are because they've got a real opportunity to fuel innovation and change. The first thing is, if you're not aware of it, there was a new UK innovation strategy that was published in July this year. It was called Leading the Future by Creating It. Within it, there's 4 core strands. There's unleashing business, and it's got a real focus around what business can do to drive change. And also what are the enablers being put in place to support business. There's a whole strand around people, institutions and places, but also importantly, missions and technologies. When looking at the view of this from an infrastructure side and a construction side, there are a number of things in here which are highly relevant. Although the document itself is fairly long, it's just over 100 pages, there are a few pages at the end which really highlight what actions are being taken going forward. And I think those for me are really important to understand, to see how we can make sure as a sector we align with the wider strategy being taken forward by government. A few of the things that are taking place are things like in infrastructure, providing a £50 million package for innovation infrastructure projects. There's also a launch in consultation around cyber physical infrastructure, which is something that all of us are thinking about around things like digital twins. People who are on that that group include people like Mark Enzer and myself. You've got pieces around world-class regulation, looking at actually what are the regulatory standards that drive both for the fourth industrial revolution, but also how they drive measurement. Now, these are things which are absolutely critical to our sector. And as we always know, and there's been some great work that was done by the Institute of Engineering Technology on this, regulations and standards can be huge catalysts for innovation if we get them right. So when we're looking at the regulation piece in here, there's two bits. There's both where there's a requirement for simplification to make the regulations easier, to make sure they don't create a barrier for innovation. But likewise, on the other side, where can new regulations be absolutely critical to help fuel this, fuel the growth in terms of innovation? The third area, which I think is really critical, is around public procurement. And this is something which I'm going to talk through a bit more in a second, which is that there is a huge lever to say, how can we make sure that government procurement can really support both the buying of innovative products and services, but also supporting the buying of innovative organizations. So how do you support the buying more from people like startups, from innovative SMEs, and people who've got new products and services in market? One thing I just want to highlight is where can you go if you want more information around this? So the UK Innovation Strategy is published. If you just Google UK Innovation Strategy, it comes up pretty high. But there's also more information around the Innovation Expert Group, which I was part of, which was a 12-month group from summer 2020 till summer this year. It was chaired by Dr. Hayatin Salem, who's the Chief Executive of the Royal Academy of Engineering, and that has some information around who those people are, and we were involved in the support of the strategy development. What's also in there is our recommendations around how procurement can also be used to fast track innovation and really sort of support the great SMEs in our sector. One thing which is highlighted in the innovation strategy is around what the innovation funding landscape is, because and I think this is a hugely useful drawing to really highlight from concept through to scale, all the different stages of where funding comes in. So you have founders funds, you have things like grant funding, friends and family rounds. Those of you who are involved in the innovation space will also be very aware around things like angel investment, venture capital from seed rounds through to Series A, B, C, as well as when people go into things like IPOs, into the public markets and the private equity space. One of the things which I thought would be just really helpful to highlight is how does public procurement fit within this landscape? And it really fits into that early commercial and that scale up space. And the early commercial space is where there's this real challenge, the real gap. Because what you can see is that from things like the Innovate UK, where you see the grant funding and things like the innovation loans, it stops at the end of pre-commercial. So when you're in that early commercial space where companies have got new products or they're quite early stage companies, they've already evidenced the value that their product provides. We really need to make sure that the procurement within projects starts to step in at that stage, because we need to make sure that there's money which is going into hands of the great small businesses with great products who can really transform outcomes for our sector. And also when you think about the funding landscape and the scale of funds available, grant funding from Innovate UK, and this is from 1920, was about 0.2 billion. You look at equity investment last year, that was 8.8 billion. But when you look at the scale of public sector procurement, it dwarfs all of this. It's 850 billion a year. So really making sure that we can leverage public procurement to deliver the targets, which is a third of all public sector investment goes into the hands of SMEs, and making sure that that can be used to leverage growth for innovative companies is absolutely key. So what I want to talk about is the fact that it's not only that there's policies in place around innovation, but these have also been mirrored in procurement policies, which now affect all government buying. Now, for those of you who are involved in the procurement space, you'll be fully aware of the PPNs. For those of you who are not, these are the procurement notices which really define out the rules around buying. And one of the key things has been the Social Value Act, which has defined out the wider value that takes place around procurement. You'll also see that there's been a green paper for consultation around wider procurement strategy, which has got some very material changes in the way that procurement is likely to be assessed and the value of schemes. One of the things, though, that is a procurement regulation, which is in place already, and this was published in June, and it's from September this year. And I think this is incredibly material in when we talk about innovation, which is that all contracting authorities should consider creating new business, tackling climate change, and improving supplier diversity, innovation, and resilience in the procurement of all contracts. So when we think about that, when we're looking at the value that every procurement delivers, we should be really going, how is this going to deliver against our net zero goals? How is this supporting small businesses across the UK? These are the things that are now becoming absolutely standard in terms of the decision making around every procurement exercise. And for those of you who want to know more about them, and just to reassure you, when you look at the PPNs and the procurement notices, they tend to only be about 3 pages long. They're pretty short, and they're all available on the government's website. So there's a home for all of the procurement policy notes. I've just highlighted what they are for 2021. There's some key things around things like net zero and carbon reduction statements. There's ones around how you approach sourcing for SMEs. And there's ones which are also from back end of 2020, really focused on transforming construction too. So it's something very useful for you to be aware of, because this is something that every government department is looking at when they're buying services. So I thought it was useful to give kind of context around where we are as a sector in terms of procurement and where the new regulations and the direction of travel within the policy side, because then that affects everything that happens in the projects that we deliver every day. And you'll start to see this in terms of all of the buying from the big organisations, Network Rails, the House England, the HS2s of this world. But one of the things which I really also want to tackle is the fact that why we really need to start taking a digital first approach to thinking about the data and the tracking, how we're supporting SMEs at scale. So to give context around the scale of the challenge that we have and around why we need to engage at scale, is over the past couple of years, there's more than 2,500 SMEs who've been directly supported by Innovate UK. They've gone through a competitive process, their ideas have been validated, that they're ones which deserve funding from government. Not only that, across the construction and infrastructure sector, there's more than 190,000 SMEs who work in the sector. Average size, their average turnover is about 1 million with more than 10 staff. So when you think about the scale of the number of companies that we need to support, and when we're thinking about driving innovation at scale and outcomes at scale, we can't be just doing hackathons. We can't just be supporting pilot projects with 10 SMEs with 10K each. This is about scale and scale of impact. Because when we look at the scale of the SME opportunity, together the SMEs in our sector deliver £191 billion of projects every year. 191 billion. They deliver 54% of the total turnover in the construction and infrastructure sector, double that of the large companies. And yet when we think about the decision making, how many times do the boards that we have who are deciding how projects get delivered, what is the SME representation? Are they representing the 50% or the 54% of the revenue that they deliver? Or are the boards representing 25% of the revenue? So how are we making sure that the decision making will really drive the outcomes that we need to drive productivity for all organisations of all sizes? Because one of the real challenges we have as a sector is that for smallest businesses, partly because of the complexity around things like procurement rates, the SMEs have got a pay gap and lose about 22 pence in every pound. So if we want to drive up digital skills, if we want to drive up productivity, we need to make sure that what we do supports companies that are small as well as the companies that are large. And one of the things that is great about all of the new procurement, but is a real challenge about all the new procurement regulations, is it requires more data, more reporting. There's more and more requirements coming through around requiring visibility around your impact, being able to source more information around social value, being able to evidence things like the carbon savings, the diversity of your supply chain. And for this reason, we really need to make sure that we look at this as a systems piece and make sure we take a very data-driven approach to looking at how can we do this reporting without adding more cost. Because we want to be driving productivity in the sector, we want to be making sure that we evidence how we're supporting SMEs, but we need to do it without adding additional cost and friction, especially to the smallest organisations in our sector. But there's huge opportunities for us to think about how we use digital to gain things like full visibility around supply chain, to build sustainable supply chains, to meet our net zero goals, to make sure that we're able to really track not only are we delivering against the social value regulations, but also are we making the procurement decisions that will lead to those outcomes. There's real opportunities to improve resilience and drive efficiency through digital transformation. And when we look at things like the Transforming Construction project, the investment that's been made in that and the projects that have been delivered, and Hannah, who's on the call, is a real expert on this, and I will highlight a couple of projects in a second. But there's real visibility around how these projects and new digital tools being delivered by both small companies and big companies are delivering real outcomes for projects now, and also being importantly adopted on large projects in the sector. So what we know is that we do have the evidence around what these projects are. We have the evidence around who these companies are, but we need to start looking at the systems and the approaches to deliver this at scale. So we're not just using these new digital tools, things like those developed by Enplan, on one project. We need to be looking at how we're delivering it at scale on hundreds or thousands of projects every year. And this is also about how to make sure that we're really supporting levelling up and supporting small businesses across the country and helping them importantly drive jobs and growth and revenue through making sure that they're delivering value on projects every day. So one of the things that we've been working on over the past year is from our side, we're a digital company ourselves, and doing analytics and making sure that we can help suppliers in terms of collaborating with their large organizations and making sure that when you're looking at your supply chain, it's much easier to have visibility around who your suppliers are, where they're working, what size they are, how they're delivering against innovation and carbon and net zero. How are they delivering against targets that you're looking for? Because we need to make sure that if what we're wanting to do is to collaborate and work with SMEs at scale, we need new ways to work and to drive that value at scale. So what we've done is just taking our platform and showing what this looks like for Innovate UK. You can see that automatically you can see companies are being supported across the UK by Innovate UK. Out of the 3,560 companies that they have supported, over 2,500 are SMEs. They're supporting suppliers across the UK from Northern Ireland to the outskirts of Scotland. There's people in Shetland, the Orkney Isles, as well as the Southeast. So this is really good to show that there is the visibility around who those companies are. But more importantly, for those of you who are in the government side and looking to buy services, making it easier to say, right, actually, these are companies that have already been funded by Innovate UK. They've gone through this process of having this validation of services that can be delivered. So therefore, why are we not using that to really support social value as well as drive innovation on projects now? Because there is so much quality and talent within the SME sector. This is about being able to unlock it. And for me, what's really exciting is now the procurement regulations enable that alongside the funding and support by things like the Transforming Construction programme. So that's all I really wanted to say as a bit of a kind of introduction around who we are, the sort of some of the experience that we've been delivering and that I've been working on over the last 20 years. And I think I'll probably hand it over to Howard now around the Q&A piece. So hopefully that gives a little bit of an introduction.
Thanks, Elspeth. That was great. Prompted many questions for me. But let's actually go to our poll and see what the knowledge in the room was, because I found the questions very interesting. It'd be interesting to see what the room comes up with. So, Abraham, could we put up the poll answers, please? So the question was, what percentage of total industry revenue is delivered by SMEs? So let's have a look. What did people think? So 50%. So what do you think on that as a good answer? Elspeth, your view?
So I think what's really interesting is we've got a real divergence between, we've got 22% of people who think it's between 10 and 20% and quite a small proportion of the sector. And then we've got other people who are very aware of how the sector is constructed and the fact it's actually delivering 54% of the total revenue, of which about 25% of the revenue is actually delivered by freelancers. So when starting to think about the sort of scale of the SME and the freelance community, it's actually more like 75% of the entire revenue being delivered by the entire sector. So it is a very, very high proportion. And I think it's really interesting to see the sort of divergence in terms of views.
We could carry out a bit of a snap poll on here of what percentage of the audience are from SMEs and which percentage of people are from larger organizations. So if in the chat, whilst we continue, it might be just interesting if you could put in just SME or large organization, and we'll find out a level of the organization. So please do that while we continue. So the next question, how many SMEs are in infrastructure and construction? So we've got quite a good spread here, 39% at 250,000, 28% at 200,000, and then filtering down. So it'd be interesting, again, for your view on this.
So the answer is it's 190,000. So it's just shy of the 200K. And I think one of the things which is quite interesting is if I look at the two things together, I would say the audience is very aware about the totality of the contribution that SMEs are making and actually the scale of the sector in terms of SMEs. And I think that really highlights the sort of the real value that we can unlock through things like the new procurement regulations, which really do identify the kind of the direct importance of supporting SMEs and supporting the targets of making sure that the money flows into small companies through that kind of public sector procurement.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. I don't know if we've got our snap poll. Let's put it up. So we've 9 people have put it in, and we range here from large organization 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Only looks like we have one person from an SME who's owned up to it, at any rate. So the majority of our audience are from larger organizations. So their understanding of what percentage of the market and how much of the contribution, I think, is really fascinating.
Absolutely. And I'd also add to that, which is, for me, it's fantastic that the large companies do also really recognize that, because they are often the buyers of SMEs and are so critical and have always been critical in the support of SMEs. My first company I founded back in 2000. And for me, working with large companies was absolutely critical to how we worked. And forming great bonds between small businesses and large companies can be great for both organizations.
Yeah, it does beg the question for me, because I work in the area of leadership collaboration. A lot of people misunderstand what innovation really is. I mean, I have my ideas, but they're not always those that other people share, because it is a word that has sort of polarities. So when we talk about innovation from your point of view, what are you really meaning by the word innovate?
So I think, if I start with what is invention? So you have our research and development and invention, which is about the creation of new ideas, which may have the potential to deliver value. For me, innovation is the application of ideas to deliver value at scale. And the value that can be delivered can be around improved health and safety outcomes. It can be delivering to our net zero goals. They can be financial growth, but it's about delivering value and outcomes at scale through the application of new ideas and new technologies.
Great. Thanks very much. I find it really interesting, because one of the criticisms or things that I find is that people say, oh, well, innovation's nice, but we don't have much time for that in the current market, because we've got skill shortages, we've got supply chain issues, we've got COVID, and these are excuses in my view, but they're also reasons for many people. So how do you answer where innovation should go when people are facing those problems?
And I think it's a great question. And I think for me, having a great problem statement is absolutely the most critical piece for innovation. So I would say if you look at one of the most innovative things we've done as a sector, and we've done overall globally over the last 12 months, is how we've adopted quickly digital technology and communication to make sure we continue to work, we can continue to collaborate without having to meet in person. So the adoption of tools like Zoom and Teams to enable us to work and collaborate, for me, is innovation. The fact we were able to transform how we work quickly is a game changer. So for me, when we look at the challenges that we face around carbon, around skill shortages, these are all great problems where what we need to do is there are huge numbers of great solutions who can help. And these are some of the ones which have been developed through things like the Transforming Construction Challenge. You know, we're looking at the problems around how do you engage with your supply chain and have the analytics. There's other people who've been looking at the problems around how do you make sure that you can deliver better carbon outcomes either through supply chains or in projects. Other people saying, right, how can you have, you know, deliver less delays in terms of projects and have better certainty around cost. Innovation is about the application of new technologies to really help us solve those problems.
Super. We're beginning to get lots of questions in. Out of our Snap poll, 41% of the audience, we'll call it 42 to round it up, are from SMEs. So you've got 42% and the others learning from the large. So let's actually now go to some of the questions, please, Abraham, if we can start to put those up. So if we could highlight the first one. Unfortunately, it's anonymous, so I can't bring anyone in. Do you think SMEs need confidence stroke reassurance by hearing examples of how others who are successfully adopting innovation and digital technology?
Oh, that's a fantastic question.
Great one, isn't it?
It's great. I would say absolutely. But I think one of the things which I've really seen, because I've been in the sector for quite a long time, as you can probably see by my grey hairs, but is that confidence is critical for innovation more broadly, which is, as a sector, I think we've been lacking confidence about how innovative we are. And actually, we're so much more innovative and we've transformed so many outcomes beyond what we initially think. And so when thinking about the confidence piece, yes, we need to make sure that the SMEs need confidence that there will be buyers and that that other small companies have been successful in selling to organizations in the sector. But we also need to make sure that the client organizations have got confidence as well that the SMEs will deliver. So being able to build that trust and confidence for both organizations is technology.
You went a bit dead there, so I think I got the gist of the answer. If the person feels they want to come back on that one and re-ask again, please do go in. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next one, please, Abraham. So the next one, in the public sector, lack of track record is seen as high risk. We are inherently risk averse, but we are as humans. How do you get around this?
So I think for me, there's a piece which is, it's all about data. So is it true that small companies are more risky than large companies? There's been work that's been done both by the National Audit Office and some work that was done around the Innovation Expert Group that absolutely refuted it. There's been some really good data highlighting that it's just not true. What you need to have is make sure you've got the right fit between the size and the work that the organization's doing and the skills and expertise in that organization. So we need to make sure that when we're thinking about risk, we're not lazy and just go small is risky, big and established is safe. We actually need to be much more careful and go, what is the outcome we're wanting to deliver? And what's the best organization and the best tools to deliver that outcome to the best possible way? I think there's a second piece around when we're looking at risk, which is if we look at things like construction infrastructure, that they're a part of our sector which are much more high risk, which is if you're working in things like a live rail environment, we need to be exceedingly cautious because safety is absolutely critical in our sector. But there's lots of other areas that we can adopt innovation, which might be in the ways that we work, the ways that we collaborate. We can deliver innovation in the efficiency and the automation of some of the admin that we do. There's lots of different ways we can drive innovation, which have got very different risk profile. So I think for me, it's about being a bit more nuanced in how we look and assess risk and make sure that we're not just putting people into stereotypical buckets, which is kind of unhelpful for everybody.
Super, you talked about a bit of research which shows that perhaps it's not as risk. How was the sector consulted in regards to this project, etc.? I think that would be really interesting to me.
So in terms of the development, so the UK's innovation strategy is a sort of UK-wide strategy which was launched by the Business Secretary. In terms of the development of it, there was a huge amount of consultation that took place in the first half of this year. It was consultation across multiple sectors. Some of it was supported by organisations like the Innovation Expert Group, who then worked in conjunction with BEIS to run workshops and consultation sessions in different sectors. Within infrastructure and construction, what we did was we engaged with organisations like I3P, which is the Innovation Partnership, to make sure that the members of that group had the opportunity to directly engage and feedback around the emerging strategy to BEIS and government to make sure that there's a direct voice from the sector. So we were making sure that the people who are really at the forefront for innovation within infrastructure and construction were able to engage directly in the development of the strategy and to make sure that this important sector's voice was heard.
Okay, thanks. That answered that very clearly. Okay, Abraham, we've got another question here. Unfortunately, they all seem to be rather anonymous, so I can't bring anyone in. Innovation strategy and PPNs. What do you think the catalysts were for these?
Oh, now that's an interesting one. So these are good questions to coming through. So if I look at the innovation strategy and PPNs, we need to look back probably 5 to 10 years. So there's been a long-term strategy to increase the support for SMEs. So there's work that's been done by the National Audit Office. There's been long-term vision around supporting SMEs across the whole of the UK. What's been happening is that's been further supported and adopted in terms of really looking at the challenges faced by things like everything from COVID, but also the wider pressures around how do we drive productivity across the UK. So for me, it's a mixture of the kind of long-term strategies around going, how do we support, SMEs, and the research that's been done over multiple years around the sort of the policies around it. And that's been supported and further accelerated, partly as a result of COVID, partly as a result of Brexit, in terms of realizing there's an opportunity for us to drive real change and real confidence that we are a very innovative country, and there's an opportunity for us to unlock that faster if we have the right levers to do so.
Thank you. If the person who asked the question doesn't feel that's fully answered it, please do come back in the Q&A. But as it was anonymous, we don't know where to go. But thank you for that. So the next one, please, Abraham. I'm interested in this. Please, could you explain the 78p per pound stat? I'd like to add a bit more on that. Doesn't it mean the 22p you talked about is what we would call waste? In other words, that's just disappeared. It wasn't. So perhaps you could explain this a bit more fully.
Okay, so there are some absolutely fantastic statistics that the government produce around business, around the sort of the business reporting every year, where they have real granularity around what the composition is of businesses across the UK, in terms of the numbers of jobs that they support, of companies of different sizes in different sectors and different parts of the economy. Within that, what they highlight is what the revenue is across those organisations and the headcount within those organisations. And if you look at consultancy and professional services in engineering and infrastructure, what you actually see is that there is a drop from large companies in terms of revenue per head, down to medium, down to small, down to micro, and then down further when you have sole traders. And the drop is about 10% from large companies to medium size. It then drops further when you get to sort of smaller companies and drops substantially further when it comes to micro. Now, when you think around professional services, this is about the skills of an individual being able to deliver value from their knowledge. Now, the difference between a 25-person architecture practice who are specialist in, say, housing is probably no different from a 25-person architecture team who specialise in housing within a large professional services organisation. But your ability to access the market, your ability to actually deliver directly for these clients is much harder. And so what you end up having is quite deep supply chains, and that creates cost. Both there's quite a lot of waste which comes through from procurement, but it also means that the leverage for a small company to charge a good rate for the services is also reduced. So there's a number of reasons behind it, and I know that there's been some great work that's been done by people like I3P really looking into that as well. And it's something that I think is a real opportunity for us to, improve on, because if what we're wanting to do is to make sure that we can really improve productivity, improve digital skills, we need to make sure that there's the capacity within small businesses to invest in that. And it's very, very hard to do if there's less funding available through the procurement processes.
So my understanding is that the 22 pence then in this pound is you attribute to waste.
It's partly waste, and it's also partly competitive pressures, which is it's harder for a smaller company to be able to charge the same rate because they're seen as being smaller and therefore less valuable. So it's a mixture of brand and waste.
I was with a company this morning and we're talking about the tendering and how much it costs them to tender, and things like design changes. These are classic areas of waste. And they're talking about waste at the front end being as high as 60%, and even questioning whether they should really tender on some things because they know they're going to go around the bazaars so many times and it's going to cost them a lot of money. Can SMEs really afford this?
Yeah, I would agree. I think the whole way that tendering works is it's highly inefficient. And one of the things which can be very difficult is things like the framework processes. So there's a huge cost to bid for things like frameworks. And if you're not in a framework, then you can't deliver, you can't be selected for projects. But even being on a framework, there's no guarantee that you're going to get work from it. What often happens within a framework process is that they ask for examples around how you would actually deliver a project. When you then get into the next stage of tendering, you get asked the same question. So there's a lot of, I would completely agree, I think there's a lot of waste and efficiency that can be driven in terms of actually simplifying the procurement process and back weighting more of the sort of the admin around it to actually, once you're into the sort of contract decision space, to make sure that you're not putting a huge amount of upfront cost in, especially for the smallest companies.
Thank you. That actually leads nicely into the next question, if we can have up, because again, it's anonymous. Are there examples where innovation is scaling successfully now? So I think that's a great question.
And I think I'm going to defer this to somebody who knows a huge amount more than me, which is there's a couple of people on the call, Cherie and Hannah from Innovate UK, who are involved in transforming construction. And in a second, I'm going to pull in some information about that, because they've got some showcases around the Transforming Construction programme, which really highlight all of those innovations which are now scaling up. So there's some brilliant examples from Transforming Construction which do exactly that. And I've got examples of both where it's been applied by people like Skanska, as well as where it's being supported by people like Enplan, who've been working with Network Rail. So yes, there's some great examples of that in the Transform Construction programme.
Would you like me to bring either or both into the conversation? We can bring them in on microphone.
If they'd be willing to do that, that would be absolutely
well, I'm sure
fantastic.
Hannah will. I'm not sure about Cherie, but Abraham, do you want to bring both of them in on the microphone and see if they want to make any comment on this? Cherie has already said yes. It's a very simple answer.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Hi, can you hear me? Hi,
Cherie.
Hannah. Hi, Elspeth. Hi. Hannah, should I go first?
Yeah, go for it.
I was just, following on from Elspeth's great introduction, I was going to say that through our portfolio of transforming construction, we do have many really, really successful startups who have managed to get grants from the government and really successfully deliver. Enplan being one of them, Contilio being one of them, their Core Converge, who had a project with us called Core, and they now work with BAM Nuttall. There's plenty, that have had grants from us and have scaled up really successfully now. Plenty of them.
Yeah, and just to support what Cherie's saying, I'm just putting in some links to I mean, I'd really encourage you to take a look at our stories catalogue anyway, but the specific ones we're going to share in the links are examples of small organisations that have been working with a larger company throughout the Transforming Construction programme and have scaled up, have that now pipeline of work thanks to the work they've been doing over the last couple of years. So I'd really encourage you to take a look at the journey and the story of those SMEs and looking at their pipeline and their business plan now.
Yes, and if I can just add from a kind of personal side, I mean, we're a digital startup ourselves, and we've had grant funding from people like Innovate UK, but we're now being applied with people at Angling Water on the Angling Spa Alliance, and also with organisations like sort of Atkins and Mont McDonald. So, you know, there is real opportunity for, I think, that funding to help really sort of fast track investment, but also, you know, there is, I think, the real appetite for large companies, if they see good products, to be able to then take them going forward.
Super. I don't know whether you could stay there, both Sherry and Hannah. We've got a next question, which you might be able just to expand on a little bit more for us, as to how you support SMEs to scale up. You know, it asks for an example, but perhaps if you could just explain how can you support SMEs, I think that would be really great.
As well as giving them grant, we then don't just fund and forget. We tend to, I personally hook them up with I3P, and I know Hannah does different angles of it. I hook them up with I3P. We create profiles for them within the I3P profile, and we make sure that their projects and their live projects are all visible to all the clients and contractors on I3P platform, to make sure that they, you know, and we endorse them by adding them ourselves, saying that we've worked with these SMEs, we approve them, they've passed our checks, and they've finished their really successful project with us. So by the fact that I introduced them to that platform, they can then get visibility and be used. And they don't need to, once they're on I3P platform, they don't need to wait to be contacted. So it's a two-way thing. So that's an extension of something that Elspeth created, the SME ecosystem. So that's one of the things internally within Innovate UK. We do have a system called Edge, which is kind of takes you on after, and there's a group of experts which can help you with all kinds of exploitation plans, which is again part of the process when you apply for a grant with us, that you need to have a proper exploitation plan, and we go through it every time with you as innovation leads and monitoring officers, and we make sure that, you know, you follow up. And then also we have another angle that we sort of hook you up with investors if you need to. So we do constantly contact our projects about their benefits and impacts, and as part of that there are questions whether or not they're interested in third-party investments, and if they actually show an interest, then we can actually link them up with various venture capitals and CVCs, and, you know, depending on what their needs are, we do support them scaling up, as well as a lot of introductions internally between different companies. So once we know what an SME does and we know of them, you know, if we find, which we have access to huge number of opportunities, we always do introduction within projects. So there's a lot of business that actually comes up from just us within our departments introducing people to each other.
Yeah, Sherry's spot on there, and that's, as Transforming Construction as a team, we're experts in our field. So we have those connections, we can make those introductions, we can do those signposts. So yeah, we work really well as a team in that regard.
Just as, I mean, I'm an SME myself and involved in this, but as an example, what's the sort of smallest sort of investment or loan or grant that one can get, and what's the largest?
I think there's no limit as such. It depends on the competitions that we run. Yeah. So they vary from competition to competition. We have a Ties Living Lab, which is 6.3 million with the EFT. And we have people who just borrow or have a grant of, say, 100,000, 150, 200, 600,000. It really depends on the competitions we run. They usually have a minimum and a maximum. And then you have to show your costs, your project costs, and then based on that, you get, depending on the size of your company, you get up to 75% grant.
So a grant
very much depends.
A grant is not repayable, but a loan is that right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, just to clarify that.
Correct,
okay,
yes.
Super. If anyone has any other questions around this, please do. But I see that very good links have been put in there for you to go to. I believe we're at this moment. Yes, sorry, please do carry on.
Sorry, can I just respond on this? Because I think one of the things which, if I look at the scale up space, and I think, so sort of building on what Cherie and Hannah have been saying, I think there is a lot of great advice to support scale up, but there's a real dearth in funding for scale up. So if you think about if you're really wanting to scale a new digital technology, you not only need to basically invest in the buying of that technology, but you also need to invest in things like change programs. Now, if you're a large organization, you will probably be having a change program for things like investing in for the next version of Microsoft. And yet what we don't have is a structured way of funding change programs for new technologies in that early commercialization space. So I think there's some brilliant work that's been done by people like the construction, from Cherie, Hannah, and others. But I do think there is a real dearth of funding in this scale-up space, in terms of making sure that, especially in that early commercialization space, where you might not have a large track record of contracts, you may have to be investing more around things like your insurance. You might have to be investing more around things like, your compliance requirements. And there's a real lack of funding and support in terms of really material things to be able to do that. And I think that for me is, both from the SME side, but also for clients who are looking to do the adoption, they don't also have the funding, especially in the construction sector where you might be on quite low margins, to be able to invest in that adoption piece and any risk around embedding a new technology, which people have not ever used before. So I think there's some great work in terms of showcasing, identifying who those organizations are, but there's a lack of real kind of commercial support, I think, in terms of that early adoption. So that'd be my one slightly controversial statement.
Great, thanks very much. We have one more question left. Okay, so do you believe that clients have a thorough understanding of the differences between MMC and innovation? So Elspeth, what is your view on that?
So MMC, modern methods of construction, for those of you who don't know what MMC is one specific piece around new ways of constructing, especially around things like the kit of parts and standardization. Innovation for me is approach is about taking new ways of new ideas, deploying them to deliver value at scale, of which MMC can be an area where you're focusing to drive value. So for me, the two things are different. Innovation is a mechanism by which you can deliver change. MMC is a change program around how you're using modern methods of construction in the sector.
Thank you. I'm going to come back on that in a minute, but before we do, I'm going to say that we have now posted the feedback poll that's available on Slido for you. We've had very little fallout throughout this, which means that obviously people have found it good. So fallout, but we do aim to finish at 1 o'clock. So if you would like to go to the feedback poll, please do give us feedback. And in terms of time, don't feel you have to do it now if you want to listen to the rest of this, but we will keep it open, as I said before, up to 1:15. I'm going to come back on this innovation thing, because to me, the sorts of, when people ask me what innovation means, things like a breath of fresh air, being ahead of the curve, imaginative, are sort of words that I try to explain innovation with. Are those the right sort of words do you think that you're trying to put over today?
I think those are some of the words that
Well, I'm not saying they're all of them.
No, I think those are some of the words that can be absolutely used to define an innovative organization who might be thinking in new ways, bringing new ideas to the table. But I think when we're looking at innovation, I think it's also got a hard commercial edge. It can deliver value for money. It can deliver cost savings. It can deliver it can fast track to our net zero goals. It is, for me, it is not only about the soft pieces around the culture and the ideas that can be brought, but more tangibly and specifically, it can deliver real commercial outcomes. And I think what we need to do is make sure that we're really talking to the commercial leads and the procurement leads in organizations about the value that this can deliver in terms of savings and value for money in the long term. Because if we keep talking about it as being the soft benefits, although these are valuable, I think it really misses out some of the real hard value that can be delivered over time.
Great. We have a question. It's come from Sid for Concrete for Change. He actually says that I'm interested in your support because he has a small grant. Can we bring Sid in, Abraham? Is Sid clearly available? And perhaps he can quickly engage with Elspeth. Is Sid clearly available? Sid, are you there? His question is, I have received a small grant from UK Innovate Edge, and I'm interested in your support for scaling up. Can you please let me know how I can contact you? I think that's really what he wants to know. So he doesn't need to come in. So if you could tell him how he can contact you, that's great.
I'm here if you have any question from me. Thank you.
Okay, Sid, she can probably tell you now where to go.
Okay, so I had a small grant that I'm developing a kind of technology for sequestration of CO2 inside the concrete that can reduce 50% of carbon footprint. So we are speaking about 8% of global emission coming from concrete.
Yeah.
And potentially we can reduce up to 4% of that. That's the size of addressable market. So we had a grant and we are finalizing our prototype MVP. And I'm just interested which other kind of support you can provide for us.
Okay, so in terms of support, the people which I would recommend you look at, so I would definitely sort of look at the Transform Construction Programme. I would certainly have a look at people like I3P, and looking at how you can support and link into their SME programme. If you're in the engineering sector, I would also really advise you to look at the Royal Academy of Engineering's Enterprise Hub, because they have enterprise fellowships to support emerging and growing companies as well. So there's a number of different schemes that I'd really recommend you link into. We're a digital SME ourselves, but it's more, I do quite a lot of work in terms of working as part of kind of boards within the sector to truly help make sure that we can drive that change. But I would really look at the Royal Academy of Engineering, I3P, the Transforming Construction, and have a look at Innovate UK. And I think those would be some really good places to start.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sid. Good question. Okay, we're coming to the end now. What I'd like to say is thank you very much to Elspeth, but I'd also like to thank Kevin has done some posting here in the chat. You need innovation to implement MMC. So he's been doing a little bit of chat there. I don't know whether you want to read it at all, Elspeth, or make any comment, but I think, he's got a point. He's saying that a better title might be Leading Edge.
I love that, and I would definitely agree. Some of those processes have been around for years. I think the word modern can be used in multiple ways. You could say modernist architecture is from the 1920s. So very much, I think the word modern has been around for a long time. And I'd say some of the work that Charlotte Pepillon did who was an architect who worked with Le Corbusier, the work that she did in Switzerland was MMC a long, long time ago. So I would definitely say this is leading edge work. Innovation is definitely part of it. And I think the new digital tools has got a real ability for us to transform the way that we deliver contracts. So Kevin, I would definitely say, yes, it's looking at how we can be leading edge in this space. And I would definitely say innovation is definitely part of the transformation.
Thanks very much. I'm going to just use the last 2 minutes to remind people, please do take the feedback poll. But more importantly, Abraham, if we can put up, if anyone wants to apply for a certificate of attendance for their continuing professional development, please do that by going to ce772@mypropass.co.uk. I'm hopeful here that we can also say, have we got a slide, Abraham, for next week's? There we go. Next week's webinar is Understanding Trade Credit Risks for Construction Companies. Same time, same place, next Friday. If you would like to register, please do. And we look forward to seeing you then. Finally, a second thank you to Elspeth for what I thought was a really stimulating session. And if you have any questions for Elspeth, I'm sure she'll be happy to take them by contacting her at IAND. Do you want to post up your email so they can contact you in a chat button? All I'm going to say is thank you to everyone for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great weekend. Many thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.